Hello and welcome to Journal of a Medical Intuitive. I'm your host, Dr. Jennifer Lisa Vest, and this is episode 10, Coronavirus and Community, recorded on August 7th, 2020. It's been a couple of months since I recorded an episode, and I want to apologize to my listeners for the long delay. When I started this podcast, I thought I was going to be talking about medical intuition and illness and my experiences with clients, how people get better, why they don't. And then the pandemic hit, and I started to get downloads, or what I call transmissions, from my guides about the coronavirus. And suddenly this podcast became a very different podcast. Family, friends, and students kept asking me what was happening when the virus first hit and the pandemic first hit. And they wanted to know what guidance I was getting. What did I know about the virus? And so I felt called to begin to get information for people, to help people with what we're all going through. And I started to ask my guides, my spirit teachers, for information about what's happening. But the information I was getting was a bit overwhelming. If you listened to my previous episodes, you're aware of that. Much of it sounded like bad news to me, and I didn't want to be the bearer of bad news. I've never really enjoyed engaging in precognition or predicting the future, and I certainly don't like predicting doom. But a lot of the information I was getting was really hard to hear. So I took a little break these past couple of months. I stopped seeking messages from my spirit teachers. I stopped recording podcasts. But people really need this information. People kept reaching out to me and saying they really need this information and I need to continue. So a couple of days ago, on August 4th, I decided to allow a transmission to come through. And it felt like time. I just had to overcome my own fear and just do it because, I'm just the messenger and the message is important and it's my job to deliver it. Even if I think it sounds like doom, I still have to deliver it. People struggle more in silence than they do with predictions of doom, because without the predictions, they just think about the worst possible outcome. So here goes my attempt to give you more predictions that are not all predictions of doom, though some of them may sound like they are. The most recent transmission comes from a star in the constellation of Pleiades. This is one of my origin stars. Pleiades is a constellation of stars also known as the Seven Sisters, and the message came from Alcyone, one of the stars in that constellation. I told them I wanted to know about the virus and the election and the pandemic. And the first thing they showed me was a very disturbing scene that involved Klansmen, Klu Klux Klan or like White Brotherhood, hate groups like that. And these people, they told me, will begin marching in large groups, and it will shock people in the United States. It will shock people all over the world. And it will add to the state of shock that people are, already find themselves in. We're all living in a state of shock right now. So when the Klansmen begin marching and holding parades, engaging in public spectacles, people will be shocked and will think, this is not a part of my reality. And people will have to deal with the fact that these white supremacist groups are indeed a part of our shared reality, that they exist in large numbers, will shock people. Now, these people are coming out from underground. They're like ants who were building underground tunnels for years and are now coming above ground to build visible mounds of dirt. These groups are coming out of hiding. They are not ashamed anymore. They are proud, and they're coming out to proclaim themselves. When I asked them why now and how is this related to the pandemic, they told me the pandemic is the reason they are coming out in the open now. The pandemic is pushing many things to the surface. The pandemic is creating such major change and crisis everywhere that it is pushing things to the surface that were hidden. The pandemic generates feelings of desperation, and when people are desperate, they do desperate things they would not normally do. And the way my guides explained it, it's kind of funny, is they said it's like the whole planet is drunk and losing its inhibitions. Lots of people are behaving in ways they would not have behaved previously. People are doing things in public they used to do in secret. And people are now speaking their mind. People are revealing who they really are. And lots of movements as a result are coming to the fore. The emergence of the Klansmen is just one extreme example of a pattern of people speaking up and creating movements. What was once spoken of in hushed tones is now being shouted. So lots of movements are emerging. Black Lives Matter is just one of the first movements that has emerged out of this pandemic, but many others are coming. Many movements are rising up, and a lot of movements are getting much bigger than they were. I asked about the coronavirus, and their response was to tell me that the virus is killing and killing and killing, and it's going to keep killing. They say it is killing people in some very particular ways that people don't recognize yet. There are some clear patterns in the way the virus is killing, and so there are swaths of land where the virus is wiping people out. So there are certain regions where large numbers of people are being wiped out in those regions. And if you were to look at the map of the United States from afar, from above, you would see a big slash going through the southeast portion of this country. And they described it as going in this large curve from like New York down in a big swirl through the southeast and then up into Texas and Oklahoma. And this very big, this swath of land traced by this curve has had very high death tolls. It's as if a giant knife were taken and slashed across the land, killing everyone in its path. I asked what the purpose of this pattern was, but got no answer. They also explained that a lot of people are dying on the coast, both because of the higher concentrations of people on the coast, and also because there are entry points for the virus on the coast. They also explained that the virus moves in ways that scientists do not yet understand. It lays dormant in certain regions and then gets reactivated later. And so the epidemiologists are having a hard time tracing the path of the virus, because the way that it moves and then disappears and then reappears is hard to track. So what they explained was that it's like if the virus is traveling across the country, it appears to duck down underground for a while and then reemerge in another location. But really it's been traveling the whole time. It's traveling on the surface, and then it's traveling below ground, and then it's traveling on the surface. And so because of that, it looks like the hot spots where there are really high caseloads of infection are moving around in a nonlinear way, which is unpredictable. But that's only because they don't understand the way it moves. And so I asked, is there any way to understand how it moves? And they said, there are areas where the people are very spread out, and when there is a lot of space between people, the virus will go dormant for a while. Because the people are not close enough together in those regions to spread the virus quickly person to person, the virus then goes underground and has to spread through plants and animals. Now, when it's traveling through the plants and the animals, people think it's gone, but it's not gone. It's just traveling more slowly, and it's just what we might think of as dormant, because it's dormant in the human population in that location. It's not activated in the human population. It's still very much alive and still traveling. So for example, when it hits farmlands where people are spread out, it travels across the land through the crops, and it travels with the insects, and it travels slowly through the crops and the insects until it reaches another big population center, and then it's reactivated. by the concentration of people close together who can spread it quickly. They also reminded me that the coronavirus works with other viruses. This is something I mentioned in an earlier podcast about how the viral load in your body from other pre-existing viruses affects how the coronavirus moves in your body. So like if you have EBV or you have some other herpes or chickenpox or something in your body from a previous infection, that affects how your body handles the coronavirus. In this transmission, they talk specifically about colds and flu viruses and how we have to pay attention to those viruses as well as the coronavirus, because it's going to piggyback on the rhinoviruses and the other viruses in the body. So we want to avoid getting colds and flus as well as avoiding the coronavirus. So you don't just want to be like, oh, as long as I don't get the coronavirus, it's okay if I get a cold or a flu. No, you don't want to get any of those. They did confirm that there will be a lull in the rate of infection and the death rate by coronavirus in December of this year. But when I asked how long, and so that's good news, right? We're going to have a lull. We're not going to just keep steadily climbing in our case rate the way we are right now. But then when I asked, well, how long will we be dealing with this virus? They said probably a couple years, but that it all depends on how people act and react to it. So it could circumnavigate the globe many times for a couple of years, wiping out people in these swaths of devastation and then rearranging things so that people are forced to respond. People have to respond, and they have to figure out how to respond to the virus. And then how they respond to it will determine how long it stays. Because the purpose of the virus is to change people. The virus is a change agent, and this was discussed in an earlier podcast. The virus is a change agent. When I spoke to the coronavirus, that's what he said. I'm here to make change happen. It has come to change us. And so the sooner we change, the sooner we can stop having the virus. We won't need it. So in previous transmissions, I was told that the virus was targeting the bullied or the oppressed. I was told that the virus was a change agent, and also that it was a manifestation of the bullying energy on our planet, that we as humans have been engaging in various forms of bullying for many years, where one group, a stronger group, oppresses a less strong group, and some type, bullying in various forms, and that this virus is a manifestation of who we are as a people, as bullies. And so I had asked them, well, why is the virus targeting people who are already bullied? And so we're seeing these really high death rates in certain populations, like the, people of color. We're seeing it among poor people. We're seeing it high death rates in poorer countries. And so we have these groups that have already been bullied now dying at higher rates from the virus. And so I asked them about that before, and what they said was, it's targeting the bullied right now, but eventually it's going to target the bullies themselves. And so I asked this time, okay, when's that going to happen? We're seeing a lot of people die who are bullied. We're seeing the most, kind of oppressed people dying. When are the oppressors, or the bullies going to die? And they said the bullies are starting to die now. They said a lot of people in the White House are going to get infected, and that a lot of people in government are going to get infected. And so I assume they're talking about those people in government who are bullies, Obviously, it's not going to include everybody in government, but those who are actually bullies are also going to get infected. And also that many family members of government officials are dying, but this information is not being made public. And so they said this information will be hidden initially, but it eventually will become known. This information will become revealed eventually, the information about the case levels and the death rate among government officials and their families. Now, a little reminder, in an earlier transmission, I was told that the coronavirus is primarily a cardiovascular disease and not a respiratory disease. And the science is starting to bear out this prediction now, as researchers are discovering serious vascular damage to the heart and blood vessels, both in COVID-19 corpses and in the survivors of COVID-19. And so that information is coming out. And given this finding, I'd like to suggest that people do everything that they can to build up their cardiovascular health and their endometrial function in particular. The lining of the blood vessels should be strengthened as a protection against long-term effects of COVID-19. So you can ask your doctor or your healthcare provider about supplements that will help your heart and your blood vessels. The Mayo Clinic and the Cleveland Clinic have websites where they make recommendations about supplementation, such as L-arginine, that's taken for the cardiovascular system. So you can do your research on that and, consult your physician. Now, I asked my guides, what about those of us who are not bullies? What can we do to protect ourselves from the virus besides, building up our cardiovascular system? And they said, people have to come together. People have to come together in community, and they have to share resources and knowledge in order to survive. People need to create communities and strengthen existing communities in order to survive. The virus has the potential, therefore, to bring people together, to encourage cooperation and collaboration. And this is one of the things we can focus on. There are silver linings to this pandemic, to this virus. It's not all bad. There are some good things coming out of this. And one of the good things coming out of this is that people are coming together in community, working together, developing strategies of cooperation and collaboration. Now, they mentioned the transition movement, which was a movement started a few years ago, I think in England, and then spread to different parts of the world. It was meant to help people prepare to transition from an oil society to a society that was not dependent on oil. And you can look it up. I don't remember the exact mission statement. But they brought this movement up, and they said that it was a good model and could be utilized if the right people got involved with it. They said it was originally set up by the wrong people, right idea. So if the right people now get involved in that type of structure, these transition communities, this network of communities around the globe, that it will be very beneficial for uniting people. And unification and community are what will be needed to fight both the virus and the chaos that's ensuing as a result. So I asked them the obvious question, how are we supposed to get together and come together and form communities when we're all sheltering in place, isolated, quarantined? How can we all work together? And they said, well, we can use our technology, and we can also gather outside. And they said we need to be outside anyway. We need to begin to spend more time in nature. And we also need to get control of our technology. So they said that we're currently dependent upon certain corporate structures that control our access to communication systems. And we need to be in control of our own communication systems. And so communities may need to build their own standalone community communication systems, or people will have to rise up and fight against the monopolization of communication by large corporate structures and government structures. Either one or both of these things will have to happen so that in the future people cannot be manipulated through structures of communication such as internet, social media, telephone companies, cable companies, news media, etc. They said this was especially important because of the election and because of the destruction of traditional forms of organization, governance, and communication. New forms have to be created. Many of the forms we used to rely on have been destroyed or are being destroyed, and so we have to create new forms. So I asked them about the U.S. election, the next election, which is looming, and they said there's going to be a lot of chaos and confusion at the election. They said there's going to be a lot of things not working, voting machines are not going to work, and there are going to be a lot of communication breakdowns that happen right before the election. So satellites, phones, cell towers going down, mail systems not working, lots of communication problems which will create chaos and confusion before the election, and that there's going to be the targeting of community systems that's going to happen in order to create confusion and chaos so that that confusion and chaos can influence the election. And what they recommended is that people begin to set up safeguards now. And so they talked about alternate modes of communication, creating alternate modes of communication, getting backup generators, getting backup systems of communication. They recommended people start hiring better cybersecurity to protect their systems. They also recommended that people diversify their community streams because certain communication methods will be targeted. If you're getting all your news through one source, diversify. If all of your friends are on one social media platform, diversify. If you're relying on the post office, use other mail services as well. Make sure you have alternate ways to connect with people if one of your methods of communication fails. They said that as long as the people continue to come together and to work together as one, as long as movements of unity grow and get larger and have greater breadth over time, we'll be okay. They gave the example of the Portland Black Lives Matter protests. The movement started out as a movement by black people to stop the murder of black people. Then all of the young people of every race joined the movement. Then the older people joined. The mothers joined, then the fathers joined, the grandfathers joined, the nurses joined, and then the vets joined. And it became a movement composed of every strata of society, multi-generational, multiracial, multi-class, multi-occupational, everyone coming together to fight together for a shared vision. And they said as long as this continues, the people will be okay. They said the time for nationalism in all its forms is over. The time for separate movements based on identity is over. The time for boundaries and segregation is over. From now on, movement must be grand and broad and diverse and popular. And this will be powerful. Black Lives Matter is working, they said, because it is a movement dedicated to the eradication of violence against a particular group of people, and the movement is composed of every community united together to stop the violence. So this, they said, is the model for the way all movements will have to work going forward. So people decide to address a particular problem in society, and then everybody comes together to address that problem. Everybody, regardless of who they are, where they're from, come together to address that problem. And then each societal problem is addressed in this way, in turn. There's no competing causes. There's no more of the situation where everybody's trying to talk about their pet cause at once and comparing them and comparing their relative importance. Instead, there's a unity of focus going forward, a focus and a sustained effort on causes which are systemic and complex in issue, in origin. And this unity is important because at the same time that large groups of people are uniting in movements to stop hate, for example, there will be movements of hate, like the Klansmen that they talked about at the beginning, the Klu Klux Klan. There will be a fracturing happening in the country. Certain regions of the United States will turn into islands or hamlets where certain people congregate. Communication will break down in certain areas, and in particular in those areas that are hard hit by the virus. So people will be moving into different regions according to their beliefs, and also as a response to the devastation of the virus, people will move. And then there's going to be these little hamlets of white nationalists, for example. And, people are going to be shocked and scared to see so many white nationalists gathered together. But if you look at them in comparison to the population of the country, of the United States, you'll see that they're not a big percentage. They're a very small percentage. But it's just going to look like a lot because they're all gathering in one place. And so the way that people are moving in and out of spaces and congregating is going to create these hamlets, which are going to be shocking. They said that there's a big shift of values happening now about absolutely everything. A shift in priorities is happening for many people. People are changing their mind about what is important. Everything is changing. Things that people used to think were important are no longer important, and people are thinking about things they didn't used to think about. And this is causing a huge shift in consciousness, which is good. This is happening every day. It's happening very fast. Every day it's happening so fast that people cannot even see how fast it's happening. They're just in the middle of it, in the rush, in the day-to-day rush of massive change and adaptation. And nothing will ever be the same again, they said. Nothing will even be the same as last week, they said. And everyone should just get used to the idea that everything is changing. We cannot focus on the past. We cannot focus on the way things used to be or the way we want them to return. No, we have to be focused on the future. And the way we are going to make things, we have to be focused on what are we going to do? How are we going to make things? How are we going to arrange things in the future? This must be our focus. The past will not dictate the future. I found this whole transmission rather difficult to take, but at the end of it, my guides gave a little advice to help us. They told us we must have faith. We must have faith in people. Have faith in the people and you will survive, they said. Have faith in the people and you will thrive, they said. Have faith in the people and you will be unafraid, they said. Have faith. Thank you for listening to Journal of a Medical Intuitive. We've been listening to music by Nature Healing Society on YouTube. Stay safe, wear a mask, walk in love.